Hi there, everyone. I think we have these books switched. Okay, so that's Tanya's book here. That's Karen's book, Sunset Crowd. Thank you all so much for coming. We're very excited to have you here, and I'm excited to be talking to Karen and Tanya today. Two very different books. Sunset Crowd is sort of the 1970s party book with lots of Hollywood intrigue and a main character, B, who's moved to Los Angeles as a photographer and intends to make it big. And Tanya's Lute is set in 18th century India with a young boy named Abbas who's moved into the Sultan's palace to do woodworking at the Sultan's behest. Surprisingly, there are a lot of similarities with these books. Both of these main characters are artists. Both have a new experience and are transformed by that experience at the end. And both books have main characters who would be viewed as insiders, but feel very much like outsiders in their world. So Tanya, I'm curious, your main character has to leave his family's home and move away. And Karen, your main character, also moves away from sort of home and comes to Los Angeles to be with this very hip crowd. Karen, you could have chosen a Hollywood insider to tell this story, and Tanya, you could have chosen like the Sultan, for instance, to tell your story. Why these characters, and what did their outsider status do for you?
Hi. First, I just have to say thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to Penn Faulkner and DC Public Library for putting on this event. And it's such an honor to be with you, Karen and Lauren. I'm such a fan. I guess I'm going to have to try to stop myself from asking you questions about your novels as well, because I love Book with a Little X. So in terms of starting with someone, I think of Abbas as a sort of small character in the midst of great sweeping changes happening in India at this time. This is in the 1790s, and it's sort of this hinge moment in the history of British Empire, where until this moment, the British East India Company was basically just a trading company, and at this point they're becoming an aggressive global superpower. And I initially, I was telling you back in the green room, I had thought, I was really attracted to this object that I found in a book. It was an automaton. It's this 6-foot-long wooden tiger that's mauling the throat of an English soldier. And back in the day, when it worked, you could turn a hand crank, and the tiger would grunt, and the soldier would sort of groan and sort of flap his hand pathetically while it's being eaten. And I just loved it. And I just thought, this is so weird and so sinister and kind of funny to me and grotesque. And I just had to know more about it. And as I was thinking about it, I kept thinking less about the object itself and more about the person who might have made it. And so, that is really what became the engine of the novel, like who this person could have been. There's a real person there, but I couldn't find any research, anything in history about who he was. So who he was, how he came to make this thing, I sort of brought my imagination to bear on these questions, and that's sort of why I started with this pretty insignificant from a historical standpoint kind of person. But in my mind, he loomed large because I myself as an artist, and so these questions of art and ambition and hunger and drive, like those were sort of personal to me.
Yeah, my book lacks like a large animal that eats somebody. But I sort of started the Sunset Crowd thinking of the main character B in a similar way, like asking questions. What sort of questions do I want to explore in this novel? And one thing I really wanted to explore was making it in the arts. It was certainly something that I thought about a lot. I still think about a lot. I was coming up on my 10-year anniversary in book publishing. And something I think about often is, how much do you want it? What lengths are you willing to go to get it? It's not talent a lot of the time. It's just drive. And so I wanted to create this group of friends who are all in the arts in different ways, and have the narrator be a little bit outside of it, but really want to be in it. Because I think that's a very American thing. this willing, like how you want to make it and how you want to be part of the in crowd when you're younger, or how you want to make it in a certain profession when you're older, right? We all have this drive to like make it in America. So I really wanted to explore that. And I made Bea a photographer because I wanted her to always be a little bit outside of the group. So she's behind the lens more than she's in it. And she's observing something she really thought she wanted so much, but as you get closer and closer to it, you realize that maybe your moral values are slipping and you want it a little bit less. And I wanted to write the 70s because the 70s are fun. They're glam, and I was just like ready for a party. It was after the pandemic. I had just written a rage book, and I wanted to write a joy book, so I call the Sunset Crowd my joy book.
I love those answers. Tanya, you were talking about the automaton, and I'm curious where you first saw it. And, there's this long history of writers, particularly writers of color, sort of looking into the archives and not finding themselves and not finding people that look like them in these stories about things that take up a huge part of our imagination. I was at a book reading that you had, your launch book reading, and it seemed like everybody in the room knew what this automaton was. And I was like, what? Wait, I don't know what this is.
That's because they all know me, and I was talking about it a lot.
You're not in the in crowd of the automaton.
Clearly I'm not. Or she filled the audience with all her friends.
Yes.
But I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about this tiger and something about your research.
So I actually wrote this novel also during the pandemic. I think I started it. I had written 2 novels that I couldn't get to work, and I give advice to my students that I have the hardest time taking. And one of the pieces of advice is it shouldn't hurt to write your novel. Like, that you should have some hard days, but there should also be the joy. Joy to me is happiness, but also pain, like all of that. But that somehow there's something that you just want to come back to, and I couldn't find that. And I think I wanted also a sense of adventure. We couldn't go anywhere. I really wanted to go places in this book and what I was working on. And I found a picture of this automaton. I was reading a book about automatons, and it made no mention, as one does.
As one does.
When desperate to find something to write about for a novel, after 2 failed novels. But there's this book about automatons called Edison's Eve, which is really good. But all the automatons were European. There was not, or maybe there's one Turkish maybe, but there was no mention of automatons in India or the Middle East, which people have been making automatons in the Middle East since the 12th century. But I just kept Googling and looking, because I liked something about the automaton itself held some kind of interest for me, and I found it in a book, and it was just a picture, like a very small picture, and then I thought, okay, I'm gonna go Hilary Mantel on this. I'm gonna find all the author of the Wolf Hall trilogy. I mean, she is such a master. She was such a master of, she just found everything there was to know about Henry VIII and Tudor England, and I just assumed naively that all of that information will be at my fingertips through Google, and I couldn't find anything about this person, in part because the British East India Company ultimately destroyed the Kingdom of Mysore and burned libraries, and we just don't have much to go on. So at first I was like, I don't know if I'm supposed to be doing this. Am I supposed to be being? Should I actually? Do I have the right to write a character, thereby displacing a person who actually existed and was erased from history? And I was listening to an interview with Ocean Vuong, and he was talking about a poem he had written about the fall of Saigon, and he said, rather than writing as a witness to a history that I wasn't part of, I was building a mythology about the history I come from. And I just thought that's just a really liberating way to think about it. I mean, how did you think about writing 1790s Trinidad? I feel like you're very good at research, and you love research. But
This
do I
is
have
so
the wrong?
not about me.
I know, but it's very awkward for writers to ask each other questions, even though we're friends. but somehow there's something more natural when we're on a stage.
Yes, it's true.
But you know, it's the same time period as my book, and so I find research to be very challenging, and in some ways, I feel like not having that much information actually helped me.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think the research is challenging, but it's very exciting finding the void, because then you know that you can actually tell a story, right? Speaking of stories, can you read a little bit from yours?
Oh, me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, yes. So this is just a very, one second. A 1 minute bit. This is where Abbas, who is this toy maker, he has been enlisted by the Sultan to create this mechanical tiger with a French engineer named Dulez, who the Frenchman is the one who's constructing the internal mechanics, and Abbas is the one who's constructing the outside. All week at the workshop, Abbas stays late, sometimes dozing on his table, head in his arms, waking at the clatter of his chisel on the floor. And while he is pleased overall with the look of the tiger, at other times he feels estranged from the thing he is making, almost convinced of a dark energy pulsing from the grain. It happens once while he is inking the line of the tiger's brow, and again after he removes the top half to sand the insides. He finds he can see out of the tiger's mouth as if he is no more than a live meal in its belly. Mostly, though, he is proud of the tiger taking shape between his hands. Tigers he can do. They live in folk tales and forests, in statues and paintings, everywhere and nowhere at once. Of English soldiers he knows little and feels less. The prospect of carving one worries him. In any case, there's always more to do for the tiger, claws to be sharpened, limbs to be laminated, a tongue to shape and tuck into the mouth. And so he keeps perfecting the enemy he knows and putting off the one he doesn't.
I love this book. So love this book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You do have a photo. That photo is in your book. Is that the one that you saw of the automaton?
Oh, there's a sketch. Yes, I found so eventually the real life automaton goes to England. That happens in the book as well. And people were writing about it, and I found this engraving of it. There's like a newspaper article like, "Can you believe these Indian people made this thing about us? How savage and brutal they are." And that was the gist. And so I just kind of put tracing paper over it and drew it to sort of, I just love when novels have some, again, like this idea of joy and playfulness. Like there's a couple illustrations in the book, and I just like the way they kind of invite the reader to engage in a different way, and maybe even in a more in the way that children engage with illustrations. It's just, I feel like we're not used to seeing those sort of disruptions.
Yeah, I love that. Karen, 1970s LA. So I'm wondering, you're not even, I mean, I'm sorry, but you don't seem like you're old enough to remember 1970s.
I was not born in the 70s.
So it's 1970s, Sunset Boulevard, very specific sort of LA. I'm wondering what you had to do to get yourself into this novel. I'm thinking that maybe you had to sort of deconstruct the ideas of what, how we all think about Los Angeles. But then, as I'm reading the book, I'm like, wow, I think she actually sort of pumped things up a little bit more, like focused on the things that we love about LA and made them even bigger and brighter. I was just wondering what your approach to that was.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a love letter to LA.
Yeah.
I do love LA, and I think that comes across in the novel. I think, no, I wasn't born in the 70s, but I had written in the 1800s, the 1930s, the 1950s. So let me tell you, the 70s felt like a treat. I mean, you all are amazing with your research. I was burnt out. I was deeply burned out, and I wanted to do research that was like more accessible and that I could find. I had a book come out during the pandemic, we were talking about it before, that was 1930s Indochine, Indochina. I did all my research in French. It was like heavy oil, like research, like the oil industry and the rubber industry, and I was so done, honestly. And I was like, I think I'm gonna research like nightclubs in LA. And you know what? It was really fun. The first thing you do when you write about LA is you buy a road map from that exact year so that people don't ding you on roads, because that is like the number one thing. You can't say like the highway when it's a freeway, and you can't say like, you can't get roads wrong. So that's the first thing I did. I bought the 1977 roadmap. I read a ton of stuff written the exact year I was writing, so I bought all these old Rolling Stones. I go to the LA Times archives. I just want to read stuff that was written then. But I've gotten much smarter about research. I used to feel like I had to know everything about a certain year, a certain place. Like, no, don't ask me about 76. Don't ask me about 78. Don't ask me about this certain neighborhood in LA that I didn't research, because I am very happy to now say I don't know. Like, I used to be super scared that people would like gotcha me on research. Like, now I'm like, I don't know, because I don't have time, you know? So I really specifically researched certain things. I have a scene at the Troubadour. Cool, I watched like Elton John, sing for the first time in America at the Troubadour. I looked at that footage. I read the, newspaper articles about it. I thought about like the cool places people were going at that time. And then I just created stuff that I want. I created my dream store, which is Sunset on Sunset, which is in this book. I created like my dream man who drives my dream car. And it was a blast. But yeah, I research in a very targeted way now. And that's changed from 10 years ago.
Your dream man is very cute.
He's
I have
cute,
to
right?
say.
I can
Very
direct
cute.
you to some YouTube hula videos. Deeply inspired my work. Yeah,
Can you read a little bit for us?
I can. I'm going to read from page 1 because I have a little story behind this, and it kind of talks about the way I write. So I'm going to just read from the first page. February 1979. It was the winter of the dead bees. There was only one at first. Golden yellow, he danced with the ceiling fan for a few hours until he took to walking slowly across the oak floor. I rolled up an old issue of Rolling Stone and made sure he breathed his last on the glossy pages. That night, they began entering in pairs. Soon, a half dozen had made themselves comfortable. A week later, I asked the white-haired woman who read tarot cards on Sunset what it meant when bees moved in uninvited. She took off her stained pink satin gloves, rubbed 3 fingers together, and said they were a sign that great wealth was coming my way. I stopped killing the bees. By mid-month, they disappeared altogether, having succumbed to a particularly cold night or a desire for even more expensive real estate. During the first week of February, I'd picked up exactly 21 dead bees, their dry wings cracking in my hands. By the time I returned from a late winter trip to Paris, they were gone. So my first sentence in my first draft was, it was the winter of the dead bees. I don't know if you all do this. I'm always super interested to see if that sticks. I always want it to stick, my first sentence, and I don't want it to change in edits, and it didn't. But that first sentence came because I was writing this in my office in winter, and all these bees came into my office, and a lot of them. And I was like, why are there all these bees inside in winter? And then I started killing them, and then I Googled it, and it was like, you will be rich if you don't kill the bees. And I was like, I'm definitely not going to kill these bees. And then so I let them die naturally, and I still have some of these dead bees on my windowsill, and my kids call them my weird dead pets, and I literally can't get rid of them now because it's some strange mental addiction to these bees. But I named my main character Bee. I kept that line, and then I always kind of have a color that is sort of the color of the book in my brain, and the color was yellow for this book. So it's I write very much off things that happened to me. So even if I wasn't alive in the 70s, I'm not from LA, a lot of things that just happen to me in my day-to-day end up in the book.
Well, I feel like in your book, you have a lot of scenes set in places, and lots of famous people show up in these scenes.
Yeah.
Do you know if those people were there at that moment? Were you seeing photos and pictures and videos of folks? And
so some, I'd say 80% yes. I definitely looked at pictures. I looked at, Vogues from the 70s. I looked at, my characters go to the Cannes Film Festival. 100% every actor I talk about in Cannes was there in Cannes at the time. So that's definitely there. But sometimes I just want the person there. Jackie Chan wasn't famous really in 77, but I chucked him in because I like Jackie Chan. And then Bianca Jagger, who's my 1970s style queen, when I worked for Politico, I randomly was interviewing her, and she was like, come back to my hotel room. And then I was like, okay, cool, yeah. And then she was like, I'm gonna write an article, sit on my bed for 3 hours, and like beyond, she like held me hostage in her hotel room. So I was like, she's gonna go in my book because she's a character. Yeah, so sometimes I just like want to throw people in, and I just do it.
I love that. So, you know, one of the things, the things that bothers me the most about sort of being a historical fiction writer is this inability to sort of explain, and I guess I should write an author's note in here, like to explain who's real and who's not. And I'm curious, Tanya, who's real in your novel? And I want to give you the opportunity to say, because I think when people read this book, it's going to sort of be important.
Yeah, I did do an author's note. There, for a couple of reasons, I wanted to make clear that because that person who made this object was real, and I don't want to have any confusion about I am really taking massive liberties with that person, you know, who they actually were. The only, I think the major real person is Tipu Sultan, who was the ruler of Mysore at that time, and he was he sort of, unlike most Indian rulers of that time, you know, it was easy to just get paid off by the British and be sort of a pawn and, you know, live an easy life. But he fought 4 wars with the British and was he put up a huge kind of defense against, ultimately, you know, in vain, because Mysore was eventually annexed into the colonies. But that is probably the biggest person who was real. There's this one other person who's really not that important in the novel. She is a poet. She's in the Zanana, the women's quarters of Tipu Sultan. She there's a verse that Abbas hears of hers. And this verse is an actual verse of a real life poet who was a Mughal poet, totally different era. But I loved this verse so much, and I just had to put it in the novel. And this woman, she was confined, and she was a poet. She wrote these lines: "If an artist were to draw me, how would he draw the form of a sigh?" And I just thought, it's just incredible to me that there were these sort of voices that have been sort of erased and stifled by history, that probably there were tons of poets like this, and we'll never know of them. And I just thought, let me include, I thought, okay, I could make up a verse of my own, which would be terrible, and it, you know, but it would be passable. Or I can bring in this verse from an actual poet, and in that way, I feel like that way the novel is speaking back to history in some way. And I included her story in the author's note because I wanted to give a sense. I like when novels have a sense of ongoingness, like that the book has ended, but the story, its borders are porous. Like it's just sort of one patch in this long and endless sort of quilt. And so she is someone who the magic that verse worked on me is the magic that verse works on Abbas, basically.
Oh, I love that. Gosh, you so transfixed me. I forgot what I was going to say. So, you know, what I did want to talk about the clockmaker. I thought he was real, but he's not real. He's the French clockmaker who Abbas goes and works with at the Sultan's palace, and he's sort of someone I think that Abbas looks at as perhaps he's going to get me out of here. I'm going to, you know, go somewhere with him and leave this life in India behind. And, you know, you can get kind of lulled into this maybe white savior trope. And then suddenly you realize, you know, that he has to sort of stand on his own. And I'm curious whether you were really trying to sort of write against that trope and what you were thinking.
I think, yeah, I think that it might have been in my mind a little bit because one book that really influenced me was Washington Black by S.E. Adugian. Oh my God, that book is incredible. And also historical fiction also is, you know, there's a sort of mentor-mentee relationship between this white man and this enslaved young black boy. And you sort of expect that mentor to do certain things for him, and those expectations are totally upended. I liked the idea of, you know, to me, there's something about that teacher you have. At some point, I just remembered as a younger artist, like that hunger and seeing what your mentor has. And at one point, Abbas thinks to himself, "I want what you have." So there's this sort of tenderness, but there's also this sort of greed. And I feel like their relationship, there's something tender about it, but also something kind of not entirely what's the word I'm looking for? That there's some darker undercurrents there. So I didn't want it to be just a sweet relationship between older man who pulls this other one up. I wanted it to be a bit more kind of fraught.
Well, it's definitely that. It's a very complex relationship they have. Karen, you have seen a couple of scenes in your book. Let me just say that there are a number of Asian and sort of mixed race Asian, half Asian characters in 1970s Sunset Boulevard, or the Sunset Crowd, and there are a lot of sort of microaggressions that are sort of happening along the way, and I think you handle it really well. You handle it sort of like they would have in the 1970s, which is sort of I'm gonna ignore this for the most part, but then there's a big moment, and it's with your very hot, guy. And he really like bristles when he realizes that he's being stereotyped and he's being held back because of his race, I think, or because of his culture and this expectation about sort of using his culture in his art all the time. And I'm just curious, sort of, your decision to include this part of a very funny book. You have that moment where he gets very upset.
I think it's a fun and funny book, but a big question in this book is who gets to succeed in America? And I think it's something we ask all the time. I mean, now all the time. Back then, even more. It was so hard to make it in Hollywood if you were anything but just like a white, straight man, So yeah, my main heartthrob character is named Kai de la Fere. He's half Hawaiian, mostly Hawaiian, a little bit French, and he wrote a movie about Hawaii that does really well. So it's sort of this thing that defines him. And then when people meet him, they're like, "Oh, like be like Hawaiian, like hula, and do the like a hot Hawaiian guy thing." And then he wants to write a movie on France. And they're like, no, like, we don't want that from you. Like, we want more of that Hawaiian stuff because we see you as Hawaiian. He's like, but I'm also, like, sort of French, and I speak French. And they're like, no, but, like, you made it with the Hawaiian thing and stay with the Hawaiian thing. And, like, I think my background is my dad is from Japan. I think a lot about men of color as heartthrobs in my books because it's definitely something, is a big deal in my life. So yeah, I wanted to write him as someone I don't see in literature. I mean, name a Polynesian male heartthrob in literature, it's hard. So I really wanted to do that. And then I wanted people to pigeonhole him and be like, keep doing this same thing, because I think that probably happens to like all of us and to anyone who's not given more freedom to write outside of things. I mean, when people are like, oh, you're Japanese, like, do you write about Japan? I'm like, I did once. They're like, are you going to again? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I grew up here, like, it's not something that I'm drawn to do again and again and again. And I think if you are in this, like, certain box and you hit it with something that's, like, from that box, there is this pressure to keep doing it. And I wanted to address that, sort of from a personal level, but also because you see that in Hollywood all the time. You see people of color being pigeonholed, that people want them to keep making things that are just like the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I love that moment. So both of you all have young characters as sort of your main character is pretty young. I mean, I think Bee is probably in her 27,
late 20s, yeah.
26, 27, and Abbas is a teenager, right? And Bee is sort of hyper connected, I think. I think about her as someone who's flitting around, she's hanging out with her friends all the time, not really taking a lot of time to sort of slow down and think about the things that she wants. And I think about Abbas as almost hyper isolated, you know, this sense of not being very connected. He's taken out of his village. He's living with this man pretty much alone. They're working all the time. And then I was like, wait, that sounds like our current day teenagers, hyper isolated or hyper connected. And I'm wondering if you thought about that at all, like sort of, you know, talking about young people, you're writing about very young people, and they're both sort of not able to see themselves and the world around them, and it has real consequences being both hyper isolated and hyper connected. Karen?
I mean, I say often in book talks that like I'm the most extroverted person with an introvert's job. So I write very extroverted characters a lot of the time just because that's what I identify with. But I did really enjoy exploring like Bee kind of realizing things about herself, you know, and I think a lot of the times we have to be told, and you're like, oh, like I'm like that, I'm doing that, and that's very much our journey in growing up, you know. But there are times where I do want her to be bolder, and I do want her to take more risks, and I do want her to leap a little bit more, but I think at that age there's fear, and I wanted to write that in. I certainly had that fear at that age.
This question is interesting. I've never thought about it before. I think Abbas has this idea that he has to choose between community or family and his destiny as an artist. He has some sense of you know, some idea in his mind that in order to get where he wants to get, he has to cut ties with anybody who will sort of compromise that clarity of vision. And I think the sort of arc of the novel is him kind of coming to realize the kind of the sort of necessity of both things, that the clarity of vision is important, but not necessarily at the expense of human connection, which is sort of obvious when we say it out loud. But I think when I put myself in the position I was in, I mean, I remember in college, I was a film major, and, you know, one night I was working on this film, this like personal film, and it wasn't working, and somebody invited me out to a bar, and I you know, I just thought, I had this idea, I know what's going to work, I know how to fix it, and I just stayed there all night. And I almost think that's like in the DNA of an artist sometimes, that when you know that you have to do something, you almost have no control over. You almost, you know, deprive yourself of the choice to do anything else. It's just. So you know, maybe it would have been a great night, but there's waking up in the morning having a cut that I was so happy to show my professor. There was no better feeling than that. I still remember it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that answer. Okay, so we're going to open up for questions, and oh, okay, yes, we'll open up for questions. I'll ask one question more. Oh, yeah, perfect. Yeah, I love that. Well, hold on one second. Let's wait for the mic, and so we can hear you better.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you so much for your presentations. I actually have two questions for Tanya, if you don't mind. The first is the passage that you read was in present tense, I think, right?
Yep.
Is the whole book in present tense? And how did you come to that choice, especially writing something that took place in the past? And then my second question was, where is the most surprising place that you found a piece of research, since you talked about some of the challenges of the particular historical research that you were facing?
So in terms of the tense, the whole novel is in present tense. I think there's something I'm always felt like I was combating with historical fiction, which is that we already know history. And so there's something almost, how do you infuse the unexpectedness and the surprise that natural life contains as we're moving through our lives, where you don't know what the day will hold and the next day will hold. And there's something about the present tense where you can't really see around the corner of it. And I thought that would be better for a character who's has no real sense of what massive, the sort of cross currents of history around him. He's just really in the moment and trying to get by moment by moment. And so I think present tense made sense to me. Now, I'm saying all this as if I actually were thinking about it when I was writing. But I will be honest and say that I feel like voice is intuitive in many ways. I feel like that's probably takes many drafts to just to find the voice that feels right, and it has to do with the character, and it has to do with your own my own sort of personality that I'm bringing to the page. But if I'm trying to kind of get beneath what that intuition is, I would probably say it has something to do with that. And then what was your other question? I'm sorry.
So thank you for that. That was really fascinating. Since you talked about some of the challenges you faced with historical research, especially researching a people in a civilization whose stories have been so suppressed, I was just curious where the most surprising place was that you found some piece of research.
I mean, I think for me the challenge was I'm impatient. I want to write. I want to get to the creative part. And so I have to kind of fight my own impatience and stay with the research until I find things that are useful. And the things that I found most useful or interesting is when the humor of that particular time, maybe through idiom, maybe through a painting, a piece of propaganda, kind of shows me something. Somehow humor for me is just this immediate conduit to understanding a time and place. And it's so much more specific than any visual detail could ever tell me. And so whenever I could discover an idiom, I found this idiom of don't go getting a swelled turban. And I just was like, that's amazing. It basically means don't go getting a swelled head. Don't get too big for your britches, whatever. But I just thought I just loved, it was worth the time of sitting there until I could find something like that, because that immediately just collapsed time for me. So it doesn't really matter to the reader in terms of learning anything, but it just gives me a sense of that place and time.
That is wonderful. It's true.
Thank you.
Humor is one of those things that doesn't always transcend history, but then when something is funny now that was funny 200 years ago, that is really a human connection there.
Yeah, I agree.
And both of these books are very funny in their own ways. I found myself, I write in my books, which I shouldn't, but I put ha ha on the lines. Lots of ha ha's. Anyone else? Oh, great, another one there.
Hi, I have a question for Karen. I was just wondering, as you write your books, do you see the movie version of them as you're doing it? And then if so, for this book, who would your main character, what actors would be playing your main characters?
Yeah, so I don't, and I think that's terrible. That probably doesn't do me any favors. But I'm really I was a book kid. I loved to read. I loved to write. I never got in this game ever thinking about movie and TV adaptions. And then I did see the money linked to them, and I was like, I should think about this way more often than I do. But it doesn't control the way I write, except I had a meeting with a guy who was a writer on Billions, this total bro, but very successful TV writer. And he was like, what are you working on? And I was like, oh, I'm writing this cool book set in 1930s Indochine. And he was like, that's stupid. And I was like, why is that stupid? And he was like, you will literally never sell film rights to that. It's so expensive. No one's ever going to dump that much money into something. And it doesn't have a giant film industry in Vietnam. It's a waste of your time. And I was like, it's not a waste of my time because I love writing this. And I don't think you can write with TV and movies in mind because the industry is too fickle, as you'll see in my book. But that said, I don't remember the question. Do I think about the main characters, who I would have play them? B is like a very waspy East Coast blonde. Sometimes I think like Blake Lively, Gossip Girl years, you know, someone sort of like that. Hard to cast Kai. Yeah, if that like, I mean, there's just not that many actors. Jason Momoa, he's too old. He's like the one Polynesian guy. If you could just get back in young Jason Momoa. And Marlon Brando's grandson is part Tahitian. And you know he's pretty cute. I don't know if he can act, but there you go. But yeah, I don't think about it. I had a big film meeting recently. That makes me sound like way more important than I am. But like, I met with my film agents in California, and I was like, what should I write to like hit it big? And they were like, honestly, we can tell you what's popular now, and by the time you write it, it won't be popular. So never even think about it. They're like, but historical's expensive. Historical's expensive. So my next book is set in the 90s because historical's expensive. So I think TV and film a little bit. The same movie, the TV bro told me to only set things in New York and LA, and after that, my book was set in New York, and then my next book was set in LA, so maybe I'm selling out.
I think we have time for one more question. I think this gentleman over here. Sorry.
Hi, thanks so much. My name's Eric. I'm a former DC high school teacher, taught writing for years, and I work with One World Education. We're the largest writing program in DC schools. And I'd love if you could talk about the fiction writing community in this city. It's not so much a fiction city, well, maybe it is to those of us here. Could you talk about maybe some of your favorite writing communities in the city, some of your favorite local publishing companies? Yeah. Thanks.
Well, I was going to ask you. Anyway, we can.
What fiction community?
Yeah.
It's small but mighty, I think, right? Don't you
Yeah.
think?
I mean, I met people from starting to teach at George Mason University, and that's how I heard about Barrel House Magazine. That's how I feel like there are just sort of smaller kind of communities. There's a wonderful reading series in DC called The Inner Loop, and that's created kind of community around itself. They do a podcast. I feel like for me, I find my community with writers is very sort of, it's just kind of like dipping in and out. You know, I see Lauren once every 6 months, but I feel like when I do see these people who, you know, whose work I follow and who I respect, and I feel like we're walking alongside each other, but I don't actually feel that we are talking necessarily all that much. But I do feel kind of, I feel reassured that these kind of pockets exist, and I know my students partake of them a lot. The other thing, this is not quite related, but I wanted to say, in terms of writing in DC, my writing life in DC, I think this is true for you too, Karen, that both of us, I think, wrote a lot of our novels at this library. I think this particular branch. And I feel like that is, you know, I know I have my spot on the 4th floor looking at the convention center. There's something about, it's not a community that I'm talking to, but there's something about all of these people being in this space, in some ways passionate about books, whatever book that is, that creates a kind of community that isn't necessarily communicating verbally, but there's a kind of sort of spirit to it that is so important to me as a resident of DC. But Karen, what do you know more about?
Yeah, I mean, I was born in DC. I grew up here. I think what really a big thing that influenced me was the amount of writers you can see, speak, and meet in DC. Like, I went to my first book signing when I was 6. It was Jill Kremens. She wrote that Very Young series, A Very Young Dancer, A Very Young Equestrian. She was married to a dude who did a lot of drugs. I can't remember who it was. One of those really good writers. Vonnegut. Yes, a lot of drugs. But I have the book, and she said, like, Karen, it's so nice to meet you. And I would go, like, in high school, I was just like, you know, kind of a poetry nerd, and I would go to these readings, and there's so much to do. There's so many authors to meet, and it makes it feel like you can do it. You meet these people, it brings down the wall you're like, this Yahoo can do it, like I can definitely do it. And that was great for me growing up. Now I definitely have like my fiction crew here. I think there's more and more people who live here. The Gaithersburg Books Festival is getting bigger. I think that's a really great one. And I don't know, I always need like fiction people who I can text and be like, can you believe this book is hot right now? This book is so bad. Or like, this book is so good, like you have to read it. And then like, are you doing a TikTok dance? Like I can't do it. Like I just, I feel like I have those people here, and it's fiction's having a moment. I think it's really finally popping off more than like nonfiction.
In DC,
In
yeah.
DC,
Yeah.
yeah.
I have to plug Penn Faulkner. Well, and particularly because Penn Faulkner has some incredible events, and it's all fiction, right? I mean, for the most part, like they are bringing in authors, they are centering authors like today. They have a great garden party, and if you follow Penn Faulkner, you will be able to find all these great fiction writers and to actually be around them a lot. Weren't you at the last garden party?
It was my first Penn Faulkner event. I felt
Yes.
very fancy.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and the garden parties are
Yeah, it
fantastic.
was really
smart
nice.
when you go to that.
And you do feel smart. You feel
Yeah.
very smart. So I think Penn Faulkner is a great place to sort of, hang your hat. And obviously the library. And I'm really happy that you all are here. And thank you so much for coming and joining us tonight. And I feel incredibly privileged to have spoken to you two. I'm really, really happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, all three of you, Lauren and Tanya and Karen, for that incredibly thoughtful conversation. You three are some of the most impressive voices of DC, so it's been great to have you here. Quick thank you again to Shreve Williams for making it possible for Penn Faulkner to be here tonight. And thank you to all of you for showing up, because this is actually how we create a literary community in DC, by showing up, by engaging with the same books together, engaging with each other, building networks, deepening our connections, and letting literature inspire meaningful conversations between us. This is where it happens. If you're looking for a literary community, it's right here in this room. And we all did it. We all did it by being here. So you should give yourselves a round of applause. I hope that before you go, you will stop upstairs and visit eCity Books and buy copies of all three of their novels, and then meet them one-on-one and have them sign them for you. Please do that. And finally, I really hope we'll actually see you all back here in this very room on May 2nd for the Penn Faulkner Award celebration. We will be honoring this year's yet-to-be-announced finalists and winner, although we announced our long list yesterday, 10 amazing books, as well as our Penn Faulkner Literary Champion this year is David Baldacci, who's done amazing things for literacy, and we're proud to honor him. You can visit pennfaulkner.org, as Lauren gave us a nice plug. Sign up for our email list. You won't miss any events of the many that we throw throughout the city, and really increasingly throughout the country as well. So thank you, and have a great night.